One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to the Investment Banking Insights podcast. My name is Alex Mason and I am your host. I am an up-and-coming MBA student trying to understand what the heck is going on with investment banking. We're trying to understand it. We're trying to learn it. We're trying to break down these concepts so that you and I can succeed in our recruiting journey, master those interviews, understand all the technical things we need to know and the behavioral things we need to know. We're talking about the balance sheet today. We've talked a little bit about so far about the assets, and I just want to touch on a couple other types of assets that you may need to know. So another asset category is called working assets. These are the assets that are literally working for your business. They're helping you actually create the goods and services. So think about the plants, the machines in the factory, or another example for a software company, think about the computers and the servers that you need to write code and all the things you need to do to produce that kind of a product. These are the assets that have real tangible value. And then there are other things like fixed assets, quote unquote fixed, because they're harder to liquidate. Remember, we talked about liquidity last time. So that's something like real estate, for example. Another thing I want to touch on are what are called intangible assets. These are the types of things that a business owns that you can't put your fingers on physically. They are things like the rights to collect royalties, for example, or maybe the concept of goodwill, which we'll get into later. But there are other things that a corporation can own that matter, that financially matter, that aren't cash in the bank and aren't real estate and aren't equipment. And that can be an important part of a company's overall financial picture, especially if it is a technology related business. So that's something else that you should know. Let's switch gears now and talk about the other side of the equation. What else is on this balance sheet? We talked about assets, things that the company owns. Now let's talk about liabilities, which remember are things that the company owes. It's the obligations that they have. And these are obligations to creditors, to suppliers, to employees, etc. And there are two ways to look at liabilities, and it's based on the time frame that things are going to be owed. You have current liabilities, which are usually defined as bills that are coming due in the next 12 months. And then you have long-term liabilities, things that are due later, way later, sometimes like way later. So remember, on the asset side of the balance sheet, we talked about this thing called accounts receivable, right? When you have the right to collect money, but you haven't gotten it quite yet. Well, the inverse situation is also true, and it's called accounts payable, and it shows up on the liability side of the balance sheet. This represents bills that are coming due to a company's suppliers. So if you as a company order something from a supplier, but you haven't quite paid them yet, but maybe you got 30 days, maybe you got 60 days to pay them, that goes as a liability on your balance sheet. So that's what accounts payable is. And then you also have something called accrued expenses. These are things that are also kind of piling up, that are obligations that the company has to pay. So think about your salary. If you work for a corporation, your salary is a liability on the company's balance sheet. It has obligated itself to pay you a certain amount of money at a certain amount by a certain time. And so things like salaries or legal bills or bank interests, those are considered accrued expenses. And accrued expenses are classified as a type of liability on the balance sheet of a corporation. Now, we've talked about a couple of different aspects of liabilities on the balance sheet, but one last piece I want to talk about is debt. Now, debt is usually a very big part of the capital structure of many businesses. So it's important to understand how it fits in here with this whole balance sheet thing. So, debt is put on the liability side of the balance sheet because it's something that the company owes. But there's different classifications here depending on when the debt is owed. If the debt is owed 12 months from now or sooner, it's considered a current liability. But if it's owed later, it's considered long term debt. But usually debt is paid back over time, right? So you may have a little bit owed now, but the majority owed later. And that's where we get this part of the liability section called current portion of long term debt. So you'll see a little bit of the principal that's owed usually in the next 12 months, and then a much larger amount that's owed later than 12 months from now. So that's another aspect of the liability section of the balance sheet that you'll want to understand. So we've talked about assets, we've talked about liabilities, but remember that whole equation that we talked about a few episodes ago? Assets equals liabilities plus shareholders' equity. We still need to talk about that third variable, shareholders' equity, and then put everything together to fully understand this basic equation of accounting. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next episode. So go ahead and join me next time on Investment Banking Insights. I'll see you over there.